Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Live conversation on teaching during COVID-19. For those of you who may have missed our virtual discussion last week, we asked the top 5 questions my office had received from a parent's point of view about the upcoming school year. But I've heard a lot from teachers over the past few weeks, and specifically after our last discussion. And that's why today we're going to take a different approach as we discuss the challenges our educators face as the school year starts during this public health crisis. I'll be brief with this introduction since our 2 incredible panelists are experts on what teachers face in the classroom. But I think we need to start by making it crystal clear. Teachers are absolutely essential, not just during this pandemic, but all year round. And just like the millions of parents across our country who are weighing what's best for our families, so are teachers. No 2 teachers or nurses, bus drivers, custodians, or paraprofessionals face the exact same circumstances in their home or a degree of risk of COVID exposure. And they deserve our respect, whatever decisions they make, just as much as we extend that same respect to our parents and their context. Many educators are parents themselves. Some are even members of the sandwich generation, caring not only for their children, but for their elderly parents. Plus, as many as 1 in 4 teachers have pre-existing health conditions that put them at a higher risk of serious illness if they contract COVID-19. So it's so important that we remain mindful of the very real dangers at play. More than 180,000 people in our country have lost their lives. And for many who have been infected, they needed emergency care. So this is a serious issue. Reopening plans that fail to address the risks of this super spreader virus will ultimately create anxiety and unsafe conditions for our teachers, our students, and parents alike. In the same way that families have been encouraged to do what's best for them, we should be encouraging teachers to do the same. And we should be doing everything we can to accommodate their needs to teach students the safest way possible. And that support needs to come from every level of government. But frankly, it starts at the top. Yet even as students prepare to return to or are already back in school here in Massachusetts and across our country, we're still seeing the same reckless absence of leadership from this administration. Over the past 2 months alone, we've seen the president and Secretary DeVos threaten to withhold funding from schools unless they agree to reopen with full-time in-person instruction this fall, while ignoring the fact that as many as 40% of America's school buildings do not meet the CDC's reopening guidelines because their ventilation systems need to be repaired or even replaced. To make matters worse, budget relief has been stalled in the Senate, despite the fact that without a federal response, unprecedented state and local budget shortfalls will lead to teacher layoffs and deep cuts to education service, some of which we're already seeing. So this fundamental lack of leadership makes our response in Congress and that of leaders in states like Massachusetts all the more important to protect the incredible teachers who are tasked with educating our children this year. And that's what we'll be diving into today. And it's why I'm so thrilled to introduce our 2 guests who took the time to join us this afternoon. First is my friend and classmate in the US House of Representatives, my star colleague on the Education and Labor Committee, and the 2016 National Teacher of the Year, Congresswoman Jahana Hayes from Connecticut. Jahana has been an absolute force in Congress. She's led on school safety, ending student hunger, erasing the student debt burden on our teachers, even ensuring that our school buses are cleaner and safer. So I want to welcome Jahana and welcome you to say a few words.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Trahan, and that was an amazing introduction. I think you hit on every one of the points that I have been concerned about, first as an educator and also as a mother. Listen, teaching is a profession that I loved, that loved me back. I have worked in the classroom for over a decade, almost 15 years, and I know that teachers do everything they can to keep their students safe. So as they are going back into school, it's very difficult to not be able to make that statement with fidelity. You are safe here. And that is just a very dangerous place for teachers to be in. And I am so happy that you are having this conversation at this critical time, because I've seen my friends and colleagues go from the heroes that saved the nation to reshifting their entire curriculum to virtual learning, to making do with nothing, to now selfish and not wanting to go back. And that's just not fair. That's just not fair. And I've seen my colleagues go through this roller coaster time and time again. But the fact that we could not close schools until we figured out how to feed kids and how to connect them to digital devices, and we cannot open the economy until we figure out a solution for schools, should remind teachers, should remind people of how critically important teachers are. And we really have to look at our work on our Committee of Education and Labor as how do we make an investment into the future of education? How do we make sure that teachers and students and parents and communities are supported with what they need and that they shouldn't have to fight for it? These should just be basic, this should be a basic conversation. And when you talk about leadership, you already know how I feel about that, because the Secretary of Education should be leading the charge on this and making sure that teachers don't have to fight for these things. The Secretary should be fighting for them. So thanks for having me, Lori.
Oh, absolutely. And it's such an important frame. And look, your experience as a teacher is only one aspect of what you bring. I mean, there aren't many members of Congress who have school-age children and are making, the decision for our kids as well. And so I'm looking forward to getting your perspective on all of these questions. We're also fortunate I'm fortunate to call my next guest a friend. Randi Weingarten hardly needs an introduction. As the president of the American Federation of Teachers, representing more than 1.7 million members, her input and that of the AFT has been essential in our work to strengthen protections for teachers on the Education and Labor Committee. And her leadership extends beyond teachers. It's the health and safety of our families, our students, and our workers. So Randi, I'm so grateful that you took the time to be with us here today, and would love to hear from you before we jump into the questions.
So you, I should be respectful, both you, Congresswoman Trahan, and Congresswoman Hayes, are dear friends. And we are, we have different positions. What we have been advocating for very much the same thing. And I was, as Congressman Hayes was talking about how teachers went from, heroes to questioning about what they're saying and things like that, I kind of pulled back what now is a very dog-eared study that we put out on April 29th. And we're all from the Northeast, at the height of COVID in the Northeast, how to reopen our schools. This was a month before CDC put anything out. It's now, the Secretary of Education has still not put anything out. It was before any other education groups put something out. And the reason, and it's on our website, and the updates are on our website, and it's free for anybody who wants it. My point is, we understood that you cannot pit learning versus life. And we wanted to try to figure out how to reopen schools so we never went through what we went through in March, as they closed in a way that people were like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? What is this virus? And what has happened is that, unlike any other country in the world, maybe with the exception of Brazil and India, we don't really know what's happening in Russia, but all the countries of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, they've all figured out how to tackle the virus first and foremost, before really trying to move to, from outside to inside. And what's happening now is this is the first big move in the United States inside from outside. And there's no national standards. There's no resources to do this. Everybody's really on their own. You have the effects of all the austerity that you just talked about, Lori, about 40% of schools not having decent ventilation. And you have, and I would say that this is probably the worst, you have a president and a secretary of education that has so mishandled it that masks become a political statement, not a public health imperative. Masks are not about saving you. Masks are about saving someone else. So we are in a situation where every parent and every teacher is in that same agonizing choice of trying to figure out what to do for his or her or their families at the same time as we don't have all the safeguards or the resources in place so we could look at people eyeball to eyeball and say it's safe.
Yeah.
And that's why you're having all of this agita all throughout the country. And I want to give the House of Representatives a lot of credit because you saw this and you made sure that there was another stimulus that really was directed to regular people. That was the HEROES Act. And, you know, nothing is perfect, but you had enough money in there to stand up state localities and schools so we could have upgraded ventilation systems. We could have the cleaning supplies now, the sanitizers, the soap in bathrooms for when you are washing your hands. We could have had the digital equipment for virtual, hybrid, or in school. We could have had the PPE, but without any of that stuff, the tents, so that you could have actually had outdoor instruction. And so what's happened is that school people are trying to do what they normally try to do, figure everything out by themselves. But this time we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
And so that is why we have basically taken the position, if it's not safe, we're going to say it. Obviously, we want to be in school. Obviously, we all know that remote is not a substitute, but I don't care how many hate mails I get. If it's not safe, we're going to say it. And we're going to make sure that people know that to the extent that communities listen to us, we are not going back to school buildings if it's not safe, because we are protecting communities, we are protecting kids, we are protecting families, and we are protecting ourselves.
Yeah. No, it's so important. I mean, and look, the reason why we acted on HEROES so early was to give ourselves the lead time to prepare. I mean, this doesn't happen in a week or 2 week time frame. So we have a lot of questions, and I want to get to as many as we can. So
Don't forget, we not only did we pass the HEROES Act, we moved on the Moving Forward Act, which was another, I think, $105 billion that included school infrastructure, which was ventilation and air quality. So on top of the money that was allocated for education in the HEROES Act, there is specific funding for infrastructure in the Moving Forward Act that would address some of the schools in our most depressed communities.
And there isn't a single colleague of ours who doesn't have a sick building, right, for a school, right, that is, presenting real challenges for students going back. So, in Massachusetts, it's different state to state, but the decision regarding whether students and teachers will be remote, in person, or some hybrid has been pushed to each school district. In some cases, school districts have, yet to make a decision because they've just surveyed, parents, and they're trying to figure out the logistics of all that. So it's been incredibly difficult for teachers to plan for the year ahead on a personal level and a professional level. So, Randy is president of the largest teachers union in the country, and Trahan is a former teacher. What are the biggest concerns you have about these three different options, and what are you hearing from teachers? What are their top concerns?
How long do you have, and how many drinks can we have?
No, I think that I can sum it up very quickly. Teachers' number one concern that I hear about is safety. Their safety, the safety of their children, the safety of their families and their students' families. They recognize there are so many outliers that are so far out of their control, and that sick kids this idea that school is just geography. The building is just geography. If kids are concerned that they're going to get their grandma sick, or their parents don't have a job, or, they don't feel good, and all of these other things that are happening, they can't play with their friends. They're not getting the hugs they were getting from their teachers before they left. They're not going to learn in the same way. We need to get the health care part of this under control. I think that probably sums it up. There's so many other things, but just everybody is concerned about. My district, I have 41 towns. This pandemic has revealed so many disparities in education. The gaps are gaping. There are some districts that where I know will not be able to have sound or any form of virtual or hybrid education because they really don't have the digital resources. The teachers haven't been given the professional development, which should have started taking place back in the spring to prepare people. You know, it drives me crazy. Teaching is a profession. People study and work their whole lives to get there. My adult life was spent educating myself on how to teach children. The fact that people think you just turn on a computer and teach is not how it works. And virtual learning requires a different skill set that needs to be practiced, that needs to be learned, that needs to be perfected. So the fact that no investment was made in the people that have to now teach children means that children aren't getting what they need. So all of those things have to come together. And I just fear that there are some districts in some communities and school districts in Connecticut that will not be able to do this without federal funding, that lack the resources already. The kids are already not connected. It's going to be even more difficult. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'm trying to be really quick, but again, Randy, there's so much. For all the people who are saying kids have to go back to school because they're depressed and they're sad and there's all of these things happening, nobody's talking about, and when they get there, we are going to just make sure that we have trauma-informed counselors and resources to meet them. Nobody's talking about that side. So we have all these kids coming from the most traumatic event in their life. They've been out of school for months. They've lost learning. They have to reset. And we're not even meeting them with the trauma-informed support services for when they get on the ground, because the expectation is the teachers will handle it.
So let me lift up, I wanna kind of build on what Congresswoman Hayes just said, but let me just first say that both of your states have done something that is quite innovative, but you see in that a bunch of all the problems. Number one, the SEL training that the governor and the unions and several of the that was announced a few weeks ago, funded by one of the great philanthropists in Connecticut. Over 10,000 teachers in Connecticut opted for that trauma-informed instruction and professional development as soon as it was offered, as a way of kind of approaching and responding to what Representative Hayes just said. And one of the things that was actually done in Massachusetts that New York City just followed, and that I've actually lifted up a lot because I thought it was really wonderful, was an acknowledgement, as Johanna just said, that teaching remotely is really different. It is not nearly as good as teaching in person, but it is really different and requires a different skill set and requires different practice because you're engaging kids differently and developmentally you're engaging kids differently. You really need to have the PD. It's not just buying K-12 ink off the shelf. It's not like K-12 ink did a really good job or any of these other tech companies did a really good job beforehand. You really have to have the confidence to deal with it and to deal with remote instruction differently. So I would actually say that there are so many issues, starting with the arc of, will we be safe? And given that 40% of COVID is spread asymptomatically, will I be bringing COVID home to my family? That is the question I hear over and over and over again. But the issue that I think has been, that I hear, the value I hear a lot, confidence and trust. The fact that there is inconsistent information, the fact that there's lack of transparency, the fact that we know that kids get COVID, we know that kids spread COVID, we know that older kids can spread COVID as much as adults. We know that younger kids can have more COVID infection in them than adults. We're seeing these charts. So then when you see a DeVos or a Trump keep with the tropes that say, oh, don't worry about kids. This is part of what creates great anxiety for people because, you know, does Lori have glasses on or not? Oh no, she doesn't have glasses on. She clearly has glasses on. But
Yeah.
you just have this level of anxiety because of the lie that makes this chaotic and confusing. And I would say that that is, from my perspective, that has been the biggest problem. And the last thing is, there's been such a focus on logistics. Of course, logistics are important. Of course, we should be figuring out what's 6 feet, how you have desks spread 6 feet apart from each other. But teachers and principals are not really facilities managers. We should have had facilities managers helping us do that. And teachers and principals should have spent the time figuring out how to do the scheduling on remote and hybrid, or, you know, let the facilities managers figure out how to get us tents or money, or get the money so that we could hire double the number of teachers and have the tents, so we could have everybody in a place like Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and New York, where you're below 5%, have everybody doing in school. But so I think we have spent so much time on the logistics, we haven't spent enough time on how to stand up education. So we're in the same exact situation as Johanna just said, like in March, where we're making it up as we go along again.
Yeah. And there's no question that we pack a lot into that job description. we really do. And you know, it's you both just gave like great.
I think Randy said it right there, where she said teachers are not facilities managers. And I think part of the problem with the profession is that teachers just do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
You know, that teaching is not a profession where you stop and say, I need for this to be done. Can we contract someone out to do it? You just figure it out. Right. So I think through just a period of just always figuring it out, people are like, oh, well, there's no problems. They're all set. They all you got to do is move the desks apart. But like you said, that's a skill set. That's, you know, we should have had someone doing that.
Right. And it's an opportunity cost, because
I'm sorry, every community doesn't have a philanthropist who's going to come in. We need a national strategy to deal with these issues.
Yeah. And just to put more punctuation, and it's an opportunity cost, when you have teachers doing that, it takes them away from, you know, preparing for what is going to be very different teaching environments, and all that PD that, you know, they're woefully signing up for, right? Because they want to do well. You know, it's funny, during the spring, I watched my own daughter, Caroline, who was, you know, kindergarten, but I watched her classroom go remote, right? Which, you know, I got a lot of chuckles over, you know, the mute and unmute, and the fact that sometimes her swivel chair was, you know, facing in exactly the wrong direction. But her teacher was, I mean, just doing unbelievable work. Not only was she giving it her all to all these young, inexperienced, you know, students, but she was also juggling responsibilities of taking care of her own kids who were at home. And you know, I think can sometimes get lost on, you know, many of us parents, how challenging it is to be a teacher in this kind of environment when you have children of your own. And so, again, a question for both of you. You're both adept at answering any question I throw at you, but like, just if you could walk us through what a school day looks like from the perspective of a teacher. You know, what do you think is most important for people to know about what it's like to be an educator during this pandemic?
During the pandemic is a very different, I mean, teachers do everything. I mean, I was a history teacher, but I was a lunch lady and bus duty and a counselor and before school, after school, all of these other things. I think some of the things that I've kind of seen firsthand during this pandemic, because my son also was at home and him and I are working side by side. And you don't know how many times I had to go into his classroom and tell the teacher, oh no, if you go into this screen and do this. So literally I'm helping her to navigate through a program that she's never used. Yeah. And no one thought about that you had teachers who have never had to turn their homes into their workspaces. So kids are saying, can I scan it and send it to you? They didn't have a scanner at their houses. They didn't have, a lot of people said, I had some of my educator friends saying, my laptop, I couldn't download all these programs on my laptop. The school district in most places don't issue devices for every teacher to take home. So while we were thinking about making sure the kids are connected, we had a lot of educators who had to run out and buy a computer to make sure that they were connected. So when you're trying to teach in this circumstances, it really is a very different skill set, because I thought about myself. As a teacher, I never sat at a desk. I never sat in one place. I was always walking, and I knew the questions to ask, or I could feed off of kids' body language to gauge their level of understanding. You could get in closer to kind of talk them off the ledge. You kind of lose that in this environment, but it doesn't mean that learning cannot take place. But there needs to be some training. So, and then working with the parents so that parents can understand this is where all the assignments are going to be. Like, let me help you help me, and there was really no opportunity for any of that. I mean, and you don't know how many times, and I think for me, funny thing, I was on my laptop, my son was on my computer, but then I had to take an unofficial meeting. I'm like, I need my personal computer back. Like, so we were sharing a computer, the internet was slowing down, all of these other things. And there really was not really a place for educators to debrief, because the other thing I saw and that I continue to see is that his teacher was on during the class. And then the teacher was available after the class because parents are calling, and it just never ended. And that's the thing I worry about with all of these various models. My daughter's a teacher right now, and they have a hybrid model where there's some kids in class and some kids online. But I mean, she has to be available all the time. Yeah. You kind of lose that line of demarcation where the school day ends at 3 and I'm going to stay after for an hour and then I'm going home. Yeah. It's like unlimited access to teachers, where parents and kids are now, I can't find the assignment. Can you help me locate it on the Blackboard, whatever, I mean, on the program Blackboard or whatever. But yeah, all of those things are what teachers are dealing with now.
So we know that, so look, people are going to know more about what is going on right now in about 3 months from now. But instinctively, think about it. We know that hybrid is the worst of all worlds. But we're doing it in many places because we know how important in-school instruction is for kids and how important making people or keeping people safe is. So that's part of the reason why we kind of walked into hybrid, even though it is not, no one would say that a hybrid model, if they were erecting a school system from scratch, they would never opt for a hybrid model, not for, childcare purposes, not for education purposes, not for reopening the economy purposes. But what's going to happen in terms of hybrid, unless there is really an ability for people to team teach, then you can't really teach in your classroom the 12 people that you have 12 kids you have in your classroom who you are looking at, and the 12 kids who are on a screen. It's ridiculous. It is not going to work. That's going to end up getting changed. We're going to have to try to figure out how to do a model where you got the remote teachers who are doing remote, you have the in-school teachers who are doing in-school, and that there's really going to have to be team teaching. I would say in 3 months from now, remember what I just said, and more things are going to look more like that. But, what do I know? I'm just a teacher. So, but what's happening right now is that, and a high school teacher, not an elementary school teacher, who really, elementary school teachers will tell you immediately what will work and what won't work. The second thing is, as Johanna just said, teaching this way is actually much, much, much harder because it requires a whole different skill set that most of us have not been practiced at. Teachers, how many times do people say, teachers have eyes in the back of their head. I always thought my mother had eyes in the back of her head. She was an elementary school teacher. But what it is that we are trained to read body language, to listen, to get any kind of, signals, because that's part of how we understand what's happening in our classrooms. You don't really have that in terms of online. So you have to do it in different ways. And a lot of that requires how we have small groups, how we really are working with parents. And a lot of this is going to be one-to-one. So it is completely exhausting, because you really have to figure out right now, with a whole new set of children, all those new relationships. At least last year in March, you had the relationships for 8 or 9 months already. So in a normal situation, a teacher is an actor, a coach, a scholar. You can't be one page ahead of your kids. You have to know your work deeply. You're constantly grading papers or creating that. So you've got to find time where time does not exist. And so you're doing all of these things. I used to say we were a combination of King, Gandhi, Einstein, and The Sopranos, and Mother Teresa, all rolled up into one. And now we're doing it in a new age with remote. And so it is exhausting, and it's particularly exhausting because it's a whole new field. Even for people who know how to use computers, figuring out developmentally what will work with their class, and what kind of teaching, what to do in the 20 minutes that a kid may be focused and on the screen, what to do in group work. All of this is brand new. So it's going to be completely and totally exhausting. And the last thing I'll say is teachers always want to get it right. And so they are devastated when something doesn't work. And so we got to be risk-taking a lot, and then talking to each other about what is working and what isn't.
Yeah. Oh, those are such great points. And it's why mandates in this regard are so hard, right? I mean, because
Can I just say one other thing, Lori, which we haven't
please.
said yet,
Yeah.
which is on top of everything on COVID, this reckoning with racism is hitting everyone in a really different way.
Yeah.
And so could you imagine, I'm not even looking at Johanna right now when I say this, could you imagine if you are teaching a high school class and your class just watched the entire Republican convention, where they kept saying that anybody who supported Black Lives Matter, what Trump and others said about that.
Yeah.
Could you imagine what you have to do walking into school right now, not just dealing with COVID, not just dealing with an economic recession, but with all of the thoughts and anxieties and frustration that have happened when the Trump, a president of the United States of America, can't even say the name of Jacob Blake or George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, who all experienced tremendous brutality. And that we're not going to be able to figure out who is really suffering and who is not when we're just on a screen.
There's so much happening right now in the world. I mean, I don't even know where to start, right, with all of that, because it's just hard enough to figure out, how we're going to protect the mental health of our children, of our families, of our communities, and certainly our teachers, right? I mean, they do get, all of this energy and questions and uncertainty, and they get it all. And there's going to be big gaps because, you know, a lot of them, to Johanna's point, they're not going to be proximate to their students who they love and they want to care for. And
No, I was thinking about what Randy just said, and I can't imagine it, because I was just having a conversation with my daughter and some other teachers who teach civics and government, and in an election year, this is, you know, teachers who teach civics are firing on all cylinders, because I would have had my kids watch the closing statements from both conventions, you know, come back and let's discuss, let's make a list of the issues, let's pull newspaper articles. But there are some painful conversations that kids are having, and they're doing that without the proximity of a teacher. Because the one thing I can tell you for sure is that I was the teacher to every kid in my class. I don't care if they looked like they could have came from my family or your family, whether they were Black, white, spoke English, I was their teacher. So when they had a problem, I was their first line of defense. So all of these kids who are dealing with these very painful things, with just trying to make sense, have very difficult questions to ask, both Black and white kids.
Yeah.
You know, because I've had kids who are saying, help me understand why this is happening. And they're looking to their teacher for those answers. And you know, that part is missing. And I worry about that we have so many young people, adolescents, kids who will go out into the world, not having had the ability to unpack some of these things with someone who they see in just as a rock or a constant for them.
Yeah.
And it really is something that is one of those unintended consequences of all of this stuff that's going on.
Yeah, no, it's such an unbelievable point, because I think we were all shaped by the great teachers that we had, and we went to them with things that we couldn't even talk to our parents about, our friends about, even our most trusted, you know, family members. And that is missing at a time in our country when, you know, that stability is, I'm sure, what so many youth are craving. You know, I know we don't have that much time, but I have to, you know, ask another question, because context matters. You know, every family has their own context, every teacher has their own context, and they all come to school each day with a unique set of circumstances, whether it's, you know, their family situation, whether it's their own health, whether it's their childcare situation. And so, you know, to Johanna and Randy, you know, what can we be doing as parents, and, you know, maybe as legislators too, to better support our teachers' mental health as they go through this tumultuous time, not just from, you know, doing the great job that every teacher aims and wants to do in the classroom, but also, you know, by their family, to protect their mental health, their safety, and their unique family context. I think sometimes it gets lost in the conversation.
I could sum up in 30 seconds, and then Randy, you can take us out. As a legislator, I will continue to fight to make sure that we are investing in education, that we are making sure that teachers don't have to make these decisions on their own, that, you know, my goal in coming to the Congress, and, you know, I have a very short list of things that I want to see brought full circle to completion. And one of those things is fully funding IDEA, to make sure that our students with disabilities and special needs have the resources that they need, and teachers and school districts can support them, because that takes a whole chunk off of the plate of local districts who are trying to really stretch really thin budgets as far as they can. So investing in public education, investing in teachers, investing in our communities, as opposed to reacting and just playing catch up. You know, kids don't have that kind of time. And I think for parents, I think I would give the same advice that Randy gave at the top of the call. If it's not safe, say it. If parents have concern, they should be elevating them immediately. They should not sit quietly. I don't care. A parent who feels like, you know, I don't really know how to engage, I don't have the agency or the capacity. That is your child. That is your child. And if there is any level of concern about the education that they are receiving, about the resources, about their needs being met, you need to make your voice heard. You need to keep over and over, no matter how many times you have to make sure that people hear you. You know, school district, I came from a district that had 19,000 kids. And I used to have to remind my superintendent, yeah, you're responsible for 19,000 kids, but that mother sitting across the table crying is only responsible for one. And in her world, that is the most important thing to her. So I think parents, if it doesn't feel safe, if you have any concerns, do not wait it out. Immediately make your voice heard.
Great.
So thank you for that, because I think it's really important advice for every parent, every teacher, having agency. Our voice, you know, we often say this about our elections, our vote is our voice, but we need to actually have and find the power that we really have, not contract out that power to others who are very willing to use it for themselves, but maybe not for community. But I would say we often we have a very schizophrenic relationship with teachers. We expect them to be miracle workers, and then we're really, really, really disappointed when they can't. We are human beings, as imperfect or perfect as everyone else. And all of the anxieties that everybody else has during this period of time, we have, but we have an obligation not to show it to kids when we're on the screen or when we're in schools. And so we hold it all in so many different ways. And we have another anxiety, which is, are we going to get it right for our kids? So teachers are under a lot of pressure right now. And just any kind of conversation that you have with your kids' teachers or you have with each other, we got to give each other grace. I heard that a lot. Look, my wife is a preacher, so, you know, I hear stuff a lot about, you know, religion, but grace. We have to give each other grace. We have to actually have compassion and have empathy for each other and hold each other virtually tightly right now. And that includes our teachers. And to the extent that we can do it and try to create that kind of community out of this crazy chaos, we will be in better stead. And so just
be patient.
For a teacher.
Be
Great.
patient. Be patient. I don't know a single one of my teacher friends who hasn't cried in the last couple weeks, who was, you know, on social media, they're posting, you know, the pain of this journey. So just be patient with our teachers, you know, because they have our kids' future in their hands.
That's right. That's right. Well, those are probably the best parting words in terms of, you know, stressing patience and empathy. And that is all the time we have today. I could talk to you both for so much longer, but I have to take a moment to just say thank you again to both of you, not just for being a part of today's conversation, but, you know, for sharing your perspective with our listening community right now, because I really think it was helpful for so many. You know, as we continue to navigate this difficult time, it's important that everyone who keeps our schools running knows that we're on your side. You know, I was blessed to have some extraordinary teachers in my life, people who inspired me to dig deep and reach farther than I knew possible. And they deserve our gratitude. And more than that, they deserve to be kept safe while they're caring for our children. You know, there's no school without the teachers, nurses, bus drivers, custodians, school lunch workers, and more. That's what comprises schools. So we need to look out for you the same way that you do our children. You know, my office continues to be a resource for both educators and for parents. And while sometimes we don't have all the answers to every question, we will certainly do everything we can to support you and get you the answers that you need to keep yourself and your family safe and healthy. So never hesitate to call our office, 978-459-0101, or you can click on the link in the chat to email me. But I want to thank you all again for tuning in. I want to thank my extraordinary panelists and wish you all well. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you. Bye.
And thank you, both of you. Thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank you for the HEROES Act. And hopefully we can get something through the Senate. Thank you.
You bet.